why don't we call this meeting to order?
You need a gavel.
Yeah, I know, right? All right, Jessica, do you want to do the roll call?
Committee Member Arciniega? Here. Committee Member Barajas?
Here.
Committee Member Murray?
Here.
Committee Member Ospina? Committee Member Pereira?
Here.
Committee Member Solano?
Here.
Co-Chair Brokaw?
Here.
Co-Chair Zucker?
Here. All right, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. And then I think we need a motion to amend the minutes to reflect that Dave was here at the last meeting, but was late after the roll call.
I so moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and then I guess with that amendment, we have a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. So we've just got one big item on our agenda today. Receive, discuss, and consider the subcommittee's report proposing Farmworker Resource Program's goals, conflict resolution process, and staff's qualifications and duties. And I think where we left it last time was really in the conflict resolution process, and I think that's probably going to be the meat of today's meeting. If we can get through more than that, that'll be great. But that's going to be our focus for now. So where will we?
I don't think we had actually started into the resolution options. We were ready to do that.
Great, perfect.
And for the record, Jessica, today we picked up the technology she's going to monitor to make it easier than writing on the board.
Wow.
That's great.
We are moving up in the world. That was exciting.
Because, I can give a report if you'd like on behalf of the subcommittee.
Oh, that's right.
Actually, you'll be reviewing the whole section because we haven't talked about any of it yet, including our
The resolution
amendments.
options. So
Yeah.
you want to wait until we get to each section?
How do you want to do this tonight?
So we had the subcommittee that met last week, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then that so we need a report and then kind of reading this
And then getting into the details, I believe.
Right, because you did agree at the last meeting on the program goals and the desired program outcomes for year one. So those changes reflect what was discussed at the last meeting, and we did leave off at the resolution options, which was also where the subcommittee met, and then continued, but not only with that area, but also just the rest of the document itself. And so then, yes, I would say that maybe we could just have a report and then begin at the resolution options area and those can start that discussion.
Great. So why don't we start resolution options and just give the report on that section then? Jessica, do you want to?
Okay, sure. So the subcommittee met and we met briefly, but we tried to focus on areas of concern that were expressed by public comment, as well as our own thoughts to address some of those questions that were posed to us, as well as add our thoughts into what was what this document was. So in the track changes document in English, the blue changes are what the subcommittee added. And so we can go over them as we get into the meat of it, I guess. We wanted to, in general, detail out a little bit more about the guidelines in terms of steps, because we had thought through it a little bit more. We had discussed it amongst the committee of how would this actually look from when a worker comes in to the telephone call that's made and what information is disclosed at what point. And that really centers around the question of retaliation and the fear that exists that oftentimes is expressed or oftentimes will prevent workers from making an issue known. And then, I guess that's the part there. And then we can talk about it later when we get there, we added some more information to the outreach section. So, that's a general report.
Anyone else who was on the subcommittee have anything to add to that report?
No, I think I agree. I'm okay.
All right. Good job, Jessica. Thank you. So my thought is maybe to just read this resolution options section, and then maybe open up for public comment, and then go to our changes. That might kind of move the process, because my sense is we'll have a bunch of comments, and then public comment will come in, and we'll have a bunch of comments that change afterwards. So maybe just go straight to public comment, and then work with folks. Great.
Sure.
Anybody want to read the resolution options section as it is now?
You'd like I can read it? Or
Sorry?
should we? Oh, okay.
Or I can move too.
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Resolution options. 1, information and awareness of existing laws, programs, agencies relevant to workplace issues. 2, coordination with employer to resolve issue. 2A, dialogue between program staff when employee chooses to remain anonymous, and employer. We recognize that some employees may prefer to remain anonymous. 2B, dialogue between employee and employer to resolve issue facilitated by program staff. That involves some subpoints. Facilitated dialogue process. Both parties will execute an agreement where both parties agree to enter the process in good faith and collaborate toward a satisfactory conclusion. Agreement will make clear what is said during dialogue will not establish legal liability. No retaliation agreement. An employer will be required to sign a no retaliation agreement to establish trust in the process, and a resolution agreement. Once a resolution is reached, both parties will sign an agreement provided by the program. 3, option number 3, referral to an agency until it gets a claim number. Agencies can take months to provide resolutions to claims. We are proposing that obtaining a claim number satisfies the referral component of the process. Or 4, referral to an attorney, preferably Spanish and Mixteco speaking, or CRLA. So do we have public comments on that section?
Evening, Rob Roy. On your last comment there on number 5, excuse me, rather than sending the employee to CRLA or an attorney, why not exhaust your efforts sending them to an appropriate state agency, like the DLSC, Cal OSHA, EEOC? Why send someone to CRLA, which is a known advocacy organization that's going to litigate? On 2B, I understand the process in terms of requiring as a condition proceeding to this program. There may be some employers who may agree to sign a no retaliation, some may not. I assume if one doesn't, that ends the process. It's done. So I think that you need to understand that, and explain to the employer that if you sign a no retaliation agreement, what does that mean? Does that mean that if they sign it and they engage in this process and it breaks down, that the employer can never take any action against this employee again in the workplace for other disciplinary matters? Are they going to be deemed to be retaliating? Those are legitimate questions. The other thing is this program is tantamount to sort of a mediation process where things are supposed to be confidential. If the resolution is reached, then there has to be some conclusive legal resolution to that. That means the employee should sign a release of that claim and agree not to pursue it legally. Otherwise, what is the purpose of getting involved? If you agree to a resolution, the employee turns around a month later, goes to an attorney and files a lawsuit based on the same facts. So, typical of most of these type of mandatory resolutions, there should be some legal impact there. There should be an obligation if you're going to go in and you're going to try to resolve this thing, then the employee should agree to release the employer from that claim. There's quid pro quo for the agreement and the process. And will not establish legal liability. I don't know what that means. In most arbitrations or mediations, the parties cannot use comments and documents in that process later in a subsequent legal proceeding, but I don't know what you mean by that, no legal liability. So maybe you could define that in some way that people understand what that means. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
Excuse me a second, fix the microphone.
Yeah, if anyone could just come up to the mic or kind of queue up, I think, oh yeah, sorry, I should have,
So hand over there.
so I should have mentioned 3 minutes per commenter.
Good evening and Happy New Year. I'd like to first pass out some information regarding an exciting new endeavor. The 805 Undocu Fund has been established, and it's an opportunity to provide disaster relief, economic relief, specifically for undocumented immigrants and their families impacted by the Thomas Fire and its aftermath. Because of documentation status, they may fear accessing relief services that they are eligible for, and then there are some that they will not be eligible for, such as FEMA and other things because of their documentation status. So this fund has been set up to provide some economic relief, and anyone is welcome to make a contribution or let any person who might need it know. So I want to wish you a Happy New Year and thank you for your continued diligence. My name is Marisela Morales, Executive Director of PAWS. Having read the outline for the program, we have some recommendations, and it includes the different sections, but I'm only going to focus on these resolution options. And I do have a printed copy that I'll hand out at the end. So with regards to these resolution options, point number one, information and, quote, ever-increasing understanding. So by default, if you inform someone, they're now aware, but that's not the same thing as over time gaining a greater and deeper understanding of existing laws, programs, agencies, and so forth. So, we expect this to, be a long-term process, and, you could have your rights and laws mentioned to you, right now, and 5 minutes later, not recall the legalities of it, and certainly, not be a legal expert on what is included or not included. So, lawyers are constantly, renewing their knowledge and learning and so forth. Certainly, folks that are not legal professionals need to have that assistance of ever-increasing understanding. So it's not just, here's the name of the law, I tell you once, this is what it is, and now all of a sudden you remember, you recall, you're an expert in that. So I think that it's important to differentiate. 2B1, facilitated dialogue process towards, quote, an equitable conclusion. So satisfactory, whenever there's a dispute, I don't know that anyone's ever truly satisfied with the outcome. Hopefully they are, but for us it's really about an equitable conclusion. So what's an equitable conclusion? An equitable conclusion is one that is informed by the existing state and federal labor standards as a baseline. 2B2. 2B2. The retaliation agreement is absolutely essential, so we want to underscore that. Fear of retaliation is a central reason for farm workers not coming forward. There must be a consequence if retaliation does occur in the short term or long term. A consequence could be that the employer will no longer be eligible to utilize the Farm Worker Resource Program for a facilitated dialogue process. There needs to be a serious consequence.
You're out of time.
And lastly, referral to an agency, follow up periodically and document outcome in general, because it could get lost with the state or federal agency and never see the light of day. Thank you. a copy for everybody.
I'm Lynn Jensen with Ventura County Collaborative. I just had a question because we're talking about things that sound like they're legal contracts, and I guess my question is, who's going to write these? How much is it going to cost? Is it going to be an attorney that you hire to do that? Is it the person you're going to hire to be in this position? Is each contract going to be different depending on the situation? Is it a boilerplate? I'm not sure I understand when you're talking about all of these agreements, how these agreements are going to come about and how it's going to work in the process.
Do you have any other comments from the audience? All right. And just so everyone knows, there will also be an opportunity to comment on the resolution process guidelines, and if we get farther into any other sections, we can comment on those as well. All right. Do we have any from the committee here? Anyone want to address any of the points raised, or have any other points to bring up on me?
I have a few things. One would be on in point number 1. I think it should read provide information and awareness, and then after the comma is just wordsmithing. Before the comma after programs, it should be and then at the end it shouldn't be an issue. It should be issues.
I agree with those edits.
So we want to just see, make sure Jessica has recorded those, just to make sure
Right.
as we're moving along.
Is that those okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
And then-
thinking about that as I was reading it.
Yeah, it sounds a little better.
Responding to Marcella's point that this needs to be not just one iteration of the laws and relevant issues, but a ever-deepening understanding. This process is, what we're describing is a specific process for a specific complaint, not in the process itself, the resolution process. Our intention, I believe, is not to educate in general about the regulations in place, but only the ones that are relevant to the issue that's being raised. So I don't think that the continuing understanding applies in the description of the resolution process.
Right, and maybe to address that point, maybe it's more putting that somewhere in the kind of staff requirements. As we get to that later, that should be part of that. But those staff's kind of job requirements that they're kind of getting regular.
Well, I'm not even sure about that, because there are other people doing that, and the role of this program is very unique and distinct, and we have to be careful not to broaden it out too much, or to duplicate what other groups are doing. So
My understanding is she was just talking about that person needing regular. I mean, the same as a lawyer was the example you used, right? Who kind of keeps regularly updated on changes to the law, and I think we all know how kind of often law is changing, right? And
changes to the law that apply to this specific issue.
That say there's a new law around Farmworker overtime, right? Then that person needs to be kind of regularly getting training on whatever's the latest changing.
I do think as we walk through 2B or even 2A for that matter, as I read through this prior to the meeting, I absolutely agree with Rob in that we all understand the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish here, which is to try to mediate a solution to workplace problem. But the reality is, when you start getting into the nuances of what that means and what a non-retaliation agreement means, what mediation and arbitration, what those words actually stand for, I'm not an attorney, but I've dealt with those issues enough to understand that they get very complicated very quickly. And the idea is to try to come up to an amicable, equitable resolution, but we also need to understand how that would play out in terms of what everyone's rights would be or wouldn't be as they exit from that. We need to dig into that a little bit because it's going to have a lot of unintended consequences that we need to be able to answer, or that program administrator needs to be able to answer in order for it to be used effectively.
The rights and obligations and the consequences if things don't go as expected, which we haven't really dealt with yet.
Right.
And I think, sorry, that's why we were trying to be careful not to say mediation, because the program staff would not be a formal mediator. So otherwise, we would have to hire somebody, you know.
Certification in
Exactly.
mediation,
So
right.
I think, but trying to address, okay, if we come to an agreement, we would want some kind of agreement that states, okay, there was this agreement. So I think it's just trying to be in between
Right.
that
Right.
makes it difficult.
Not sure if that was well crafted and reviewed by, we have a lot of attorneys that are
Yes.
in our space that could take a look at that and give advice. I mean, everyone understands what we're trying to accomplish, and I think it can be done. It's just a matter of drawing that out in a more concise way where you understand rules of the game.
But also to the point of that staff member having access to that up-to-date knowledge. So as we think about where we want to house this program, what resources would be available to the staff to get information on whether it's updated labor laws, whether it's, you know, if we put it in a community organization that has nothing to do with labor law, that person may not have those resources readily available, as opposed to being in an agency where maybe they can make a call
Right, to county council.
internally. So it's just something to think about as we think about the location.
Oh, that's an important point.
We constantly go back to, resolution of workplace issues, and I think it's important that that staff understands that any workplace issue has to be pertinent to existing labor laws, making sure they're not dealing with issues that are not pertinent to any labor laws. The spirit of this whole program is that developing trust amongst employees and employers. And going through this, it concerns me when I start seeing this. I understand the spirit of this retaliation agreement, getting the employee, having the employee have the confidence to talk about this openly, but it's going to deter trust amongst, it's just like David, we need to figure out a way to word this to where we ensure the trust of the employers, the farmers, the attorney issue. I would just like to see referral to an agency, period, and let them handle it and completely X out the attorney aspect. That's just gonna turn farmers away. I mean, it's if we're trying to develop trust amongst the whole community, we need to be mindful of that. So.
And really from in terms of what is really going to happen as this program gets launched, you're going to have the potential, what will happen is workers will go to their respective groups and ask their experts as to whether or not they should participate in this program, much the same as an employer would. They're going to go to our respective trade association attorneys and ask whether or not this is a good program for them to engage in. And if neither one of those parties advise them that they should engage, then we're no better off. And so it's important that we get this right from those, perspectives.
So maybe could we dig into? I think we've had 4 or 5 kind of things that have floated, and maybe we can dig into them one at a time. So maybe do we want to start with that non-retaliation agreement, since that seems to have generated a lot of conversation, and see kind of what that really does, right? Answer that question. What does that mean, right?
Absolutely.
Clearly doesn't mean that employee can never be never be disciplined for anything ever again for the rest of eternity, right? So what would, what would a non-retaliation agreement mean in this case, and are there other examples? I'm looking at the lawyer at the table here.
Well, I mean, I wasn't part of the original subcommittee that included the language, but I definitely believe in my experience that it's something that is important enough to include. And I don't know the specifics of, how it's going to look other than a commitment to not retaliate against a worker who has decided to bring up an issue, that there's a problem, and would like to engage the employer, if that's what they choose, to address that problem, to find a mutual, solution that benefits both sides. So I really see it, I guess, first, without getting into legal, interpretation, as the first demonstration of good faith on behalf of the employer. And the reason being is that, we know how strongly you believe it occurs or not, that the fear of retaliation is the biggest deterrent for workers to speak up about issues that they want to address on the job. And so I think that to me, it needs to be included as a demonstration and an assurance that for stepping forward, and we all may take for granted what that really means, and we've had to do it in our lives or not, but I think that for people whose livelihoods and lives depend on their job, and there's so many factors that could deter them speaking up because of the loss of that job, an assurance of not being retaliated against for bringing this issue forward, to me, is really fundamental to building that trust. And I don't know what that means for how that deters trust. I'm interested in learning more. But from a legal standpoint, I think that, it means that an employer is not going to seek out, choose to make a decision that they would otherwise make on a business reason based on this person's action or participation in the process. And I don't think that it would necessarily mean that an employer couldn't take disciplinary action or other, required actions based on business reasons. I think it just means that, you don't, and whether we believe it happens or not, and I don't know, and we don't know, but we've heard plenty of people who suspect it does, that sometimes people are targeted, or, even there's been allegations of people being blacklisted, and I think it's just a very real, it can be a very real experience for people. And so I really think that needs to be included. And I don't think that we need to make it really legally complicated, because then we are moving more towards a non-trust legal, let me get my attorney, you get your attorney, and we're going to make this thing, a compromise, rather than hopefully we can make it into the spirit of cooperation and using good faith. And maybe, lawyers don't get involved.
I agree with that. And yesterday, I talked to a farm worker talking about this new program, and that farm worker said, "It's the same. I don't know. I don't want to participate in this program because it's the same. If I want to bring up some issues, and I get retaliation, and that way I don't want to bring up issues, because if I go to another farmer and another company, it's the same. That's why. What do you think this program gonna help that? Gonna change that? And I thinking is very important that we had an agreement in order to build a relationship with farmers, with employees, and the advocates. We need to get to the point about retaliation, because retaliation is very, very important, and employees have a lot of fears to bring their issues to any agency because of the retaliations.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I feel like the fear of retaliation is the number one reason why the current system doesn't work. I mean, there's a lot of different barriers for farm workers, but I think, that is the number one thing that is giving people a lack of confidence in the current system, a lack of, willingness to kind of participate in the agencies that already exist. And if we don't fix that with what we're creating here, then we might as well all go home, right? I think, there's probably a way to figure it out. I mean, clearly, there's retaliation units at the DLSE and, agencies like that, right? And so there is some way that and I'm not an attorney, that it's determined whether a disciplinary action was retaliation against someone bringing a claim or was, totally unrelated issue. So it seems like a thing that, can be worked out. We don't have our county council here today. But my sense overall is that, we talked about two of those things, the kind of, the retaliation, and then, adding something around, maybe as the employee signs something at the end saying, I release this claim, right? If I got this kind of mediated claim, I'm not going to then turn around and also kind of, double dip and go and sue my employer for the same thing I just got mediation from. And to me, that's kind of, there's a little bit of something extended from the employer and the employee, right? One on the front, one on the end, where the employer is saying, I'm going to enter into this and not retaliate, right? And then the employee is saying, I'm accepting this, and I'm going to kind of, free you of any legal obligation to this, right? And those two things seem to come hand in hand for me.
I think that's important. I mean, just for the record, I support having a no retaliation agreement for all the reasons that were discussed. I think it's important, but with anything, it needs to be equitable, right? If you're going to give something, then you need to get something in return, to your point, and that's fair to ask. My only issue is this deserves further study in terms of understanding what the unintended consequences might be, right? We know what we're trying to accomplish, but we don't need to get overly technical with it from a legal standpoint, but we certainly need to understand what everybody is signing up for versus what they aren't.
I think it would be helpful, perhaps, to talk about what we mean by retaliation, is because I think there's a whole range of things that could be interpreted as retaliation. Outright loss of job is pretty clear, but what about less advantageous work assignments or much more subtle kinds of response from the direct supervisor? That's pretty hard to describe or measure or guarantee against. So I absolutely hear the fear of retaliation, but what kind of retaliation is that fear primarily focused on? I would like to know.
That's right. I certainly hear both, and I hear from workers as well. That kind of put you in the area that nobody wants to work in or whatever, right? Those kind of subtle things. You just get less work, or or then there's the thing of the next season, right? You're not brought back. I don't know. Now, do you want to?
Yeah, I think is what you said. Companies know the laws, and they know if they fire someone that bring up issues immediately, is against the law. They know that, and that's why they look a different way to do the retaliation, less work, change to another job that pay less. And what you said, the next season they don't recall that employee. That's why many employees said, I don't want to do that. I feel like in this company they pay good in this job that I performing right now. But if I said something, maybe they gonna change me another job that they pay less, or maybe they don't recall me after the off season. Yeah, and maybe in a minute, maybe some of those workers here can tell more about that.
I think one of the ways that we, it's part of what I have to try and determine in my job, and, one of the ways that one of the many ways that we consider it is changes. So changes to the person's, it's kind of described as an adverse action, but it could be any number of the things you said. But we've also had allegations that it could be where the review of the product, right, of the fruit is being more closely reviewed, which we know would lead to workers being more stationary to have that box reviewed and not back into the row picking their fruit. So people have alleged that, after speaking up, that then their boxes were fine, the quality was fine in their boxes, and they were getting them punched and they were making this many boxes, but after they spoke up, then they were more closely reviewed, they were sent back into the row because somehow the berries now were not being picked properly, and that in essence slows people down and it makes them lose money. And so I think a little bit of what Juvenal alluded to is that there may not be an outright firing or not recalling, but there may be a gradual change in the way that person is encountering their workplace that would motivate them to now no longer feel they want to continue working there.
And that kind of definition of retaliation is laid out in existing state or federal law, right?
I think each agency probably has their specific legal standard in terms of what, we know our case law that we rely on to look towards that, and it's an analysis that you take into consideration of all these different factors to determine whether the company was making a decision based on a business reason or were in fact trying to discriminate or retaliate against an employee. It's a kind of very factual-based decision.
I think what we were trying to address is that the fear of retaliation doesn't become a barrier for accessing the program. So we thought, well, the language can be worked out by, the attorneys, but that was the spirit of it. I mean, if there's another way to get at it, we're open to considering it, but I think it was, okay, if that fear is present, how do we make it not a barrier to accessing the program?
That's what I was getting at. That's retaliation is something that should not be tolerated. But on the same token, what do we do with a farmer who one of his employees came here with a workplace issue and he asked to sign this non-retaliation here and he doesn't sign it? Does the process end? We need to determine that. I mean, what do we do at that point? I don't envision that happening, but it can happen. What do we do?
I mean, my thought would be that at that point it goes to kind of those other options, right? And one of them being that the worker could then file a claim through the normal process with the agency, or the worker could decide it's not worth it, and maybe they don't pursue it. But then that one of the three options is kind of exhausted. Right? Those other two are still on the table. And hopefully that's the incentive for the farmer to be willing to participate and sign the retaliation agreement, is that's it. Creates a win-win.
I think what's becoming evident to me is that there's no way we can really promise or guarantee that there won't be retaliation. We would be making our best effort to prevent that. And so then the question is, if we can't promise and guarantee, does that mean farm workers won't use the program?
I think everyone knows, farm workers especially, that you can't guarantee or promise it. But I think that it helps to facilitate the use of the process if there is affirmative commitment that for coming and using this process and taking your time and taking my time, I'm not going to later use this against you. I mean, I think it's like Isel kind of said it succinctly, that I can't even remember, but that it was a way to facilitate people wanting to use the program. And we're talking about now, like the worst case scenario, right? And now I'm afraid that that is going to mitigate against even including something that is really necessary and a good part of the program, because we're thinking worst case scenario, and I understand we have to think about these things and think them through, but it kind of works against, I believe, where we're trying to go, because then if there's no guarantee, and so therefore we don't include the no retaliation agreement, so then what's really the difference now between going to a state agency and trying to use this program? And then this program just being a referral service to those state agencies. I mean, if we're trying to create something as another option for all parties, I respect what Danny and Dave and Ellen have said about farmers being doubtful or reluctant or deterring, but that also exists from the farm workers as well. And so the fact that now the other party or the other side may be experiencing a little of that shouldn't mean that I guess you both can't be uncomfortable. It shouldn't mean that now, because that may occur on this one party side, that now we shouldn't have that. It's going to occur on both sides, and I don't wish it for anybody or feel like it's a good thing, but it goes back to that, coming together at the table and sitting across from each other and maybe both feeling some of the same apprehensions.
There's probably never been a mediation in the history of mediations that hasn't had both sides be a little uncomfortable, right?
I mean, another way to look at it is we could say it's a good faith agreement, right? They're both coming into good faith and citing existing law.
What, just like using an existing definition of retaliation and saying, here's what,
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
Well, because you mentioned that, there is kind of a no retaliation language and the different, I don't know if it's one law or just how each agency interprets it, but I don't know if there's standard language that is already out there. Because, I also understand what Danny and they're trying to say is if there's another issue going on with that particular employee, then is the farmer or the employer going to feel like, well, now can't do anything about that because I signed this agreement?
Right. I mean, if I'm an employer, if we look at this from a spirit perspective, I've thought from the beginning that what this is about is the fact that conflicts happen. Conflicts are actually good because they give you an opportunity to create mutual understanding amongst both parties. And what we're trying to do is create an atmosphere where, from an employer's perspective, your risk is, I would much rather have somebody make me aware of an issue before they go talk to Natalia.
Right.
Right. That oftentimes doesn't happen. And so this would offer an alternative to that to allow us to try to sit down and create mutual understanding for that issue. And obviously that person could go walk out of the meeting and go call CRLA or ALRB or whoever. But this would be a way to try to guard against that by just having a discussion, right? Just having an informal discussion about what we want to do, right? And if we could create that and not have any legal ramifications of doing so, I think that's what we're trying to achieve. That's it.
Yeah.
With what Dave said, how about we just put facilitated dialogue process? Both parties will execute an agreement with both parties, agree to enter the process in good faith, and collaborate towards a satisfactory and equitable conclusion with the employer's understanding that retaliation is unlawful. And forget about the whole retaliation.
What was retaliation is what? Unlawful. I like that, but we're dealing here with a power issue, unequal power. Employer is more powerful than the employee. So I think it's got to be a little stronger than that for employees to, they may still feel they're taking a little risk, but it's got to be mitigated a little more than that. And this is, I think, we are really dealing with tough stuff here to make this work in the spirit that Dave describes and Yasel describes very well. And I don't want us to get discouraged, but this may take more time, and it might be helpful if we tried to put on paper what a no retaliation agreement might look like. Not a big legal document.
Don't get any lawyers involved.
But it would be useful to go out and talk to people, including lawyers, about how you can achieve exactly what I outlined,
Yeah.
right? Which is just a very simplistic form. And I think it can be done.
Right, and maybe, whether it's 2 documents or 1 document, I think those conversations can help flush out. But do we think we need those completed before we can move forward with this, or?
So, a proposal that maybe we kind of table this and kind of get, I think we're actually closer than we think to kind of on the same page here around the spirit of the thing, right? There's just a little, just like in anything, right? There's a little nervousness on all sides about what exactly it could look like. But we kind of move forward and table this, getting that we're all kind of on the same page of the spirit of the thing, and maybe Jessica and Yasel, one from an advocate side, one from the grower side, but also, one from a lawyer background and one from a HR background, right? Kind of put their heads together around what a kind of, agreement could look like. It's maybe not super legalese, but it's also, but it also really provides that clear definition of what retaliation is, and, and kind of comes back to us with a little kind of one-pager or something.
Are you talking about just tabling that one bullet, the no retaliation agreement part of that section?
Yeah, right. Then we could kind of revisit that at a future meeting, but that, we kind of agree that there should be some form of non-retaliation agreement, and, we can feel more comfortable once everyone sees it.
Yeah, and maybe we should think about the third bullet point. I think the agreement that we were envisioning is similar to what Rob said, some sort of release of claim. So do we need to work on both?
Should we work on that one too? Seems like that might be good.
Okay.
I mean, I'm open to doing that.
Okay. And the idea was that these would become standard documents that would be used every time, as opposed to negotiating a new one for every case, right?
That's right. And then that kind of addresses Lynn's question as well. So. Great.
So we actually are referring to 3 documents here, B1, 2, and 3. So maybe you could work on all of them.
I thought it was the retaliation and the release.
Well, there's an agreement to enter into the process. Maybe it doesn't need to be a written agreement.
Or maybe 1 and 2 can be one.
The agreement is kind of part of the retaliation agreement. The agreement to enter into the process is kind of the retaliation.
Yeah, they
I mean,
could
the
be wrapped
release
together.
would come if there's a resolution.
Right, no, we're talking about the retaliation piece and the entering into this process in good faith. So
I think
perhaps
that's
that
one
could be one.
document. Yes.
That could be
Yeah.
one document.
Right, because you
yeah.
have to think it's going to come before, and so you want to get that from the front to start the process, and then you get a resolution, then you have your resolution agreement or whatever, and it has the release. But if it doesn't come to a resolution, then people go off and do what they're going to do.
Right.
But the worker, I guess, from that standpoint, has that assurance that, or the commitment and good faith that it's not going to now be used against them, that they tried in this process.
Do we want to address Maricella's suggestion in B1 that instead of a satisfactory conclusion, it be an equitable conclusion? because she said very rightly that getting satisfied.
I think she's right.
Not a very inspiring word is satisfactory, right?
That's a better word.
Right. All right.
I
And then,
support that.
and then the last comment I heard was around the 3 and 4. Do we want to either say we really want to prioritize 3 over 4, or even some suggested take out 4 altogether?
Well, I mean, the way that I see it is that these are just options that this staff person or persons are going to present to the worker.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily
We're not
mean...
encouraging them to do one.
Right, it's like, these are your options, you come to me with this issue, you know, we have this resolution process we can attempt if your employer wants to engage. Or, if you don't want that, you're here for information to an agency, or you're here for information to a private attorney. I think Ellen and Juvenal and I at our last meeting, we did kind of scratch our heads a little bit in terms of referral to an attorney, because then we thought, well, how do, you know, who's going to be on this list?
Yeah, especially if it's a public agency
You know,
referring to
and
private
it's
business,
like,
right?
it definitely has to be a certain group of attorneys that represent more employees on the labor, you know, but then how are we really choosing who does that? And so the CRLA was added because, one, it's an access to justice that traditionally people without a lot of money and don't have traditional access to justice can use through CRLA, but also they have their own list of attorneys for different issues that they can provide to workers. So I guess we kind of punted a little bit and thought,
Yes, we did.
let CRLA give them their list of attorneys and not have to make a decision ourselves about who should be on this list that the county program's going to give out. But I don't see it as that being more than another, or like scary or anything. I just see it as the range of options. So I don't see that it's a problem to include that would be an option presented.
I'd actually like to see it a little more general than that. I mean, again, the spirit of what we're trying to achieve is to resolve the issue, and there certainly are further steps that you can take. And to me, it's more about a referral or advice on what additional options are available to that person, right? Because it may not be an attorney, it may be OSHA, it may be
Right.
any number of state or local agencies that they could talk to. You know, the attorney's one option, but it isn't everything.
Right.
And so we may want to leave it more general.
And combine 3 and 4 in some way.
I do like keeping 3 separate in that it has that point around, you know, that if they do go the agency route, the Farmworker Resource Program is kind of providing them help navigating the kind of complex bureaucracy of an agency.
Because that's one of the main purposes of the program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Versus referring to an attorney is kind of more, I don't think they would help them, you know, navigate CRLA's bureaucracy, right? They would just say, here's CRLA, right? But I think that's a good point that Dave raised, that it could be not just CRLA, it could be referring, you know, saying, here's CRLA, here's DFW. I mean, it could even, you know, be Ventura County Ag Association. My understanding is sometimes, you know, disputes are resolved through Rob's shop, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, you know, how
Yeah, and I
common
think
that
that
is,
was,
but, like,
you know, I agree with including other agencies, and I think it was more, okay, if 1, 2, or 3 are not working, the employee might say, well, what other options do I have?
That's more than likely.
So it was
the
more
case,
about, okay,
right.
these are other
Yeah.
options too.
So
we
maybe
might
it could
also
just be.
consider,
Oh, sorry.
we might also consider that it's not that the resolution didn't work, so now here you go. It's more like that person first coming in the door and giving him that, here's the range of options, right? I mean, that's how I see it. I see it in the interest of informing people.
Right.
And again, referring back to the access to justice and the access to that information. Many of us, you know, can get online and go to Cal Bar or go to Ventura County Bar Association, or we know attorneys personally in our lives, and we're talking about, you know, many times people who have never met an attorney, don't know any of their family, and don't know necessarily how to access them. So I don't see this as like pushing like people to sue. I see it as an access to information. And why shouldn't farm workers have all the options presented to them like everybody else?
So perhaps there should be an introduction to section 2 that says presentation of all available options, and then the list.
Yeah. I like it. Or maybe it's not section 2, or maybe it's just the introduction to the whole thing. But yeah, I totally agree with that
Yeah.
adding a sentence at the beginning that says, the Farm Worker Resource Program will,
Well, I think
looking for
actually-
more formal words, but like lay out the options, right?
Yeah, because one, what's numbered as number one is not really an option, it's just like the main thing, right? Of saying, provide information of existing ways to address your workplace concern, essentially, and then the options are those listed underneath. Is that what you were
Right.
saying, like,
Well,
make a more general statement?
yeah, either at the beginning or as an introduction to two, instead of launching right into the list of options, it would say presentation of available options to resolve issue, and then one, coordination
Right.
with the
Right.
employee.
Well, yeah, what if 2 becomes 1, 3 becomes 2, 4 becomes 3, and then this 1 actually becomes the beginning of the intro paragraph, right?
I see.
Like the Farm Worker Resource Program will provide information and awareness of existing laws, programs, and agencies relevant to workplace issues, and options available to the worker to resolve that issue.
So let me just give you a little bit more background as to why we put it as number one, because we thought that maybe some of those calls or issues that come in that are logged could be just, hey, what is X,
Oh,
right?
sure, right.
Maybe somebody just needs some
That's
point
right.
of information,
Right, that was
and then
an
they can
option.
close that case by saying, okay, this information
Yeah.
was provided.
Right.
After how many hours should I get paid overtime?
Exactly,
Right, yeah,
something
yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So that's why we put it as one, because
Okay,
some
that's a good point.
things might be just, they're needing a piece of information.
That's right.
Then,
Right.
2 would be another option where it requires more of that dialogue with the employer.
So if there's a conflict or dispute, then here's the options for that. I like that one staying as one for that reason that you stated.
So does anybody have any potential language for kind of an intro line before we get to 1 then?
Well, maybe the title could just say presentation of resolution options.
Presentation of?
Well, it's
Yeah.
not, they're not really resolution options if one could be just answering a question. They're more like
That's a resolution.
aspects of well, that's true. They're more like aspects of a program though, right? These are like the different, well, I don't know.
We might want to reword one to focus it more on sounding more like an option, presenting the law that might resolve the issue, not so general a statement.
But I think the differentiation there is that number one, people are just asking for information, like a piece of information to understand. Whereas the other options, they actually want to change something or they're dissatisfied with something that's happening.
Right.
2 different
Well,
things. I think
yes.
that's important to
Resolution.
delineate, yeah.
So what about this pretty simple intro, just farm workers seeking assistance from the Farm Worker Resource Program will be presented with the following options, colon. And then that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So seeking assistance could be they're seeking a resolution, but it could be they're just seeking information, right? But they're seeking assistance from the program in some way. And the farm workers seeking assistance from the Farm Worker Resource Program will be presented with the following options. And then I think the acronym we've got up there is our advisory committee acronym. I guess it should be the yeah, hoping I'm not. They all just signed up for another job.
I mean, it's almost like the first step needs to be a consultation, right, about what it is why am I coming in? Is this something, I mean, take this example. Somebody walks in and they say, I think I may be shorted or my payroll information may not be reflected correctly on this pay stub. And that could raise a question. These pay stubs are extremely complicated. Somebody might walk in and ask that question, and the resolution could be that program
Helps them read their pay stub.
helps them read their pay stub, or calls the employer and says, this person has a question about their pay stub. Can you have somebody walk through with me, and I'll explain it to them real quick. Done.
Yes.
we move on.
Yes.
That case is closed,
Yes.
I
right?
think
That's
that-
gonna
Yes.
that's gonna happen.
Yes, that
That's
would
a
be under
common
number
issue,
one
right.
perhaps, but that's where the process guidelines that follow.
Yeah, when
the
we get to
first
the
step is the
guidelines, it gets
intake.
more into that kind of detail.
Right. I like the word consultation that Dave is using. Maybe instead of presented with the following options, farmworkers seeking assistance will receive a consultation on the following options. Would that?
To me, if you think about this intuitively, somebody's gonna walk in, there are gonna be a series of questions that are asked based on what's being presented, and then there's a discussion over what the best course of action moving forward would be. It's a workplace resolution issue, that's one fork, and that's the right fork. The left fork may be additional information. How we wordsmith that would probably take some more time to say it correctly, but I think that's what we're trying to achieve.
Well, I think we've made some good adjustments here.
I want to-
some great public comment.
I want to just address Maricella's point that we should do more than just get if I understood you correctly, Maricela, get more than just a claim number from an agency. We should make sure that the claim is moving forward. The original subcommittee struggled with that a bit because we know we have to be mindful of how much this staff person can do. And our big focus is trying to facilitate this resolution at the workplace. So we didn't want to get bogged down in these other alternatives that we hope won't become necessary, but aren't really the main thing we're trying to accomplish. So do we want to go any further in tracking a claim?
We did talk about follow-up in the next section.
That's right. That is.
We said in anyone, well, I don't know if we want to get into the next section, but there is something there around follow-up.
Yeah. Our folks kind of satisfied with covering that in the next section, because I think that is an important point, right? We wouldn't want to just stop at a claim number. We want to make sure to circle
Right,
back
very exactly.
afterwards with Farmworker and ensure that there was actually some resolution. The other thing, and I kind of had to. It's funny to cut your boss off at the mic, but that was awesome, by the way. Nice job. But the other point here that I noticed in this written document is around kind of defining an equitable conclusion, and that an equitable conclusion is one that is informed by the existing state and federal labor standards resolution as a baseline. And so do we want to add language like that? Do we think it's enough? I think what that's getting at, right, is when in terms of a mediation, what is equitable, right? Is if an employee say if an employee was found that they kind of were shorted a certain amount of money, right? And they get that money back. Is that equitable? Or if it was under state or federal law, they would they'd see that money back, and then there'd be hefty penalties, and everybody be paying lawyers, right? And there's kind of more than that, right? But I think to some extent that law really involves that there's kind of some level of compensation for the fact that an employee had to kind of go through some difficulty, right? Both in experiencing that they may have needed to pay bills, whatever, and they had to took some time to get those wages back, and that they had to go through kind of maybe a harrowing experience talking to their boss about it, and B, that there's kind of a disincentive for an employer to do it. It's not just kind of you get caught taking a cookie and you got to put the cookie back, right? But there's some sort of disincentive to doing wage theft in the first place. Is equitable more than just that, or is there a way to define equitable, right?
I mean,
we all,
in reading it, it doesn't sound like there's necessarily any downside of including that language, but I would say, again, as we get more specific, that takes us down a path that then becomes difficult to balance on both sides. That's one piece. The other piece is we may be asking that program officer or administrator to be told everything, and they may not know what well-informed means, right? But the spirit is good. I think that obviously, right, it should be in compliance with the law, but I'm just not sure what the ramifications of that might entail. We should consider that.
Certainly, this program doesn't have the authority to kind of assess fines or penalties, right? We know that, and whatever's kind of ultimately agreed on would have to be, satisfying to the employer and the employee in order to even be agreed on, right? But I mean, yeah. So it could involve just the program telling both parties, here's what this would be if you went to court or you went to the DLSC or whatever it would be. But I mean, my sense is that employers actually save a lot of money potentially, in this program, both in kind of additional penalties that might happen if they were, if it went through the say DLC or OSHA process and then the legal costs of representation.
Right. I mean, you certainly don't want to agree to something that's illegal at its face value, right? Which could happen if you had somebody that was uninformed on both sides.
right.
So,
I think the language of being informed by the existing labor standards as a baseline I think it's good language because to me, it alludes to the person that's going to be doing this process is going to know those things and know what is, the parameters, right? And then attempt to find an equitable conclusion within those parameters. They're not going to go way, lowballing, and they're not going to go way over exorbitant, as, I'm thinking in Spanish. Either. So I think that language is fine.
You're
Because I
talking
think
about
it's a reality.
in Marcella's,
Well, I mean, I don't know that we need to
An equitable conclusion is one that is informed by the existing state and federal labor standards resolutions as a baseline.
2B1.
Well, if you look at the cause letter, it's on the second page, 2B1, yeah. And, defining, right? Because equitable, there's a monetary aspect to it, and there's also, along the spirit of this program and the lines of feeling empowered or feeling affirmed, It could be a resolution that doesn't have anything to do with money, but rather some type of a meeting that needs to be held in the field or an acknowledgement of a problem that then is remedied because of the issue being brought forward and the worker and the employer working on it together. So, I mean, that could be a very equitable conclusion that doesn't rely on money or the law necessarily.
Which is why I think it's good that this has kind of as a baseline, right? It's kind of using that as a reference point, but not necessarily as it has to be whatever this law says, right? Because this isn't kind of a.
Well, you could read it that way, or you could also say that that's the minimum, right? If you're saying it depends on how you read it.
Sure.
Maybe that can be addressed in the agreement rather than in here.
You're just watching it all to yourself.
Even in the agreement that you two are going to be. Right? Well, I'm happy to put that work on you.
I don't know that it needs to be in the agreement, but I think it needs to be part of what we recommend to the supervisors as some guideposts or some parameters, definitely. And I think when it comes to the monetary aspect, maybe as a baseline, yes. But again, there could be additional things that equitable means.
Again,
But
I like
we
what
need
we're
some
trying
more
to.
dialogue and thought on it.
I like what we're trying to achieve. I like the spirit of it. The spirit of that is good. But we just need to understand when you start when you start getting specific with words, that could have consequences that we may not like, right, on both sides.
I mean, so maybe, I was saying I liked as a baseline, but if baseline kind of seems to imply a floor or something like that, maybe taking as a baseline out and just doing an equitable inclusion is one that is informed by, right? So it's like, it's informed by, it's not, it's not necessarily, but just kind of defining what is equitable, what is equity. Would that be okay with folks? That line without that as a baseline?
I don't mind adding that in because I'm going to want to educate myself more on what this all means regardless. So I think this just, it adds language to a process that we're going to have to dig into a lot deeper anyway, right? So I don't have any problem with putting that in there in terms of trying to spell out the spirit of what we're trying to achieve.
If we did that, Lucas, I would like to add, responding to what Jessica said about other types of resolutions, add common sense and the golden rule.
All right.
And the laws.
Called it common sense and what?
The golden rule.
Oh.
I mean, that's odd, but I think that picks up the spirit more of what
I
we're
agree.
doing.
Yeah.
So I think we were saying just to standards on the language that she's adding there, right? Federal labor standards, comma, and you want to add, Ellen, common sense?
And the golden rule.
And the golden-
Is that okay? Is the language feel too informal for anyone, or
Does everyone know what the golden rule means? They want to spell that out for those who don't.
I mean, what if it was just federal labor standards and common sense? I mean, I like
What is the golden rule?
We like to know what is the golden
Treat
Don't
others
treat others how you would like to be treated, right?
And there's a lot of things, right?
Is that biblical? Where's the origin of the golden rule?
I don't know. Ellen.
No. It's a biblical reference.
Maybe since this is a government thing, we could leave it at common sense, maybe.
But it does raise the question or the point about somewhere in this process and I think we have them in what we receive from the board or presented to the board, but what are the principles by which we're engaging in this, right? We're trying to create win-win solutions with the golden rule, just the basic stuff that everyone can understand, regardless of where you come from and which side of the table you sit on. That's what we're trying to achieve. Everyone defines that a little bit different sometimes, but it'd be important. I think I'm always trying to bring that back to what our original intent was, right?
And what
those
is
real simple
unique
things
about what we're doing.
I think there's room, I mean, I like that, and I think that you should volunteer to be on the subcommittee who develops those principles. Because you do,
I'm happy to do that.
express them
Yeah.
eloquently, and I think there's a lot to work with there, but maybe I'm thinking of that as part of the next section of the guidelines. Because there are guidelines of what is going to guide this process, this resolution process, and that these are principles that should be guiding this process. Maybe some of them are worth being laid out.
How about if I come next time with some suggestions?
That's great.
And we'll make that
You could also always FaceTime.
I could.
FaceTime.
Your phone?
Oh,
Got lots of great homework for next time. So it's almost 7:30.
Yeah.
Are we ready to move on from the resolution options section, or are there any other?
well, I think we need to get public comment. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's what we did. Oh, right. We can't approve it until we get another round of public comment.
No,
Or-
that's right.
We did public comment at the beginning of
You
this.
just kind of wanted, after you read it, you wanted to get public comment and then have the
Yeah.
board discuss, kind of churned it.
Right.
But what you could continue is receiving public comment on this section if there is anything, now that the board's discussed this area, now maybe somebody else might have some concerns, you could still continue public comment. Again, formally approved it, that's where your recommendations are.
And then we're going to do the full approval of the full
Or
document.
you want to actually go back and
Right.
still change. That's what we
Okay.
included, the track changes, and as the committee keeps moving forward, and if something changes, we can keep going.
So what,
Can we
what
see
do
the rest of the changes that were done, just so that?
The ones done today, the changes done today, so, yeah, Jessica's highlighted those in yellow.
Okay, because I thought we did make a change on number 4 to include other,
Rule to,
we talked about CalOSHA, BCCA.
and maybe it's referral to,
No,
or,
but those are agencies.
yeah, so those would be under 3, but maybe it's for attorneys and local attorneys and nonprofits or something that, but it's just kind of, it's kind of giving the menu of options, right?
I think we may want to change the referral,
Yeah.
that verb in number 4.
Maybe provide information about?
Yeah.
To me, it's, additional resolution options that could be any, I don't like the word attorney in there, I don't like the CRLA in there. I think Mixteco speaking is appropriate,
To additional resources?
or additional where the resources are, well, referral to an agency.
Well, how about just saying legal resources? You don't want to,
Yeah, maybe it's more legal aid or, legal aid resources? And then I think we could probably take out CRLA since CRLA is
Yeah.
legal aid.
Yeah.
So we're saying agencies are one group, and then additional legal aid resources, right?
Right.
Right. Whereas 3 is really referring to government agencies, right? And then 4 is kind of legal aid.
I think that's good.
So, what I would maybe suggest for the sake of time is maybe we go into the next section, and we can read that section, take public comment on that, and then if folks have comments on the previous section, they can feel free to comment on the previous section or the current section. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. We'll read this next section real quick, and then we can open up to public comment again. Resolution process guidelines. Number 1, listen and complete intake sheet to get comprehensive understanding of problem/concern and desired resolution. Questions included in intake sheet will help gather all pertinent information for research and resolution. 2, determine urgency and prioritize accordingly. Be mindful of statute of limitations. Criminal matters should be referred to the district attorney's office and or the police department. Staff should offer to accompany the employee to make the initial contact. 3, present relevant information to employee that may help guide and or resolve the issue. Laws, agencies, programs. 4, present resolution options, including the no retaliation clause from employer. See above. 5, obtain employee decision regarding potential meeting with employer or to remain anonymous. 6, contact employer and explain the proposed resolution process, including the no retaliation agreement, and obtain agreement to participate in resolution process chosen by employee, meeting in person or staff alone. Initial contact, up to 2 phone calls and 1 written attempt. If no response from employer, it will be assumed employer does not want to participate. Once agreement from employer is obtained, verbally review the issue, follow up with letter describing the issue, relevant information that could help resolve the issue, and next steps. 7, assist with agreed upon resolution option. 8, follow up on successive resolution, including initial follow-up, 2 weeks, and a second follow-up after 30 days. 9, any one case should not be inactive for more than 1 month. So I think we'll open up to public comments on that section. And again, if you have any comments on what came up in the previous section, feel free to share those as well. And we have 3 minutes per commenter. Anyone can come to the mic.
I'd like to go back to resolution options. I think it was Dave who made the point about item 1, keeping item 1, an option being providing information to the workers about existing laws, because many times they don't know them and they may have had a different view, and that resolves it right there. So I was proposing provide information for the awareness of existing laws, programs, et cetera. This is a little different wording for that process. And with regard to the resolution guidelines, I guess it just gets back to section 6. If it would be assuming the employer does not want to participate, then you probably have to refer to section 3 above, I guess, or whatever the section above is, where you would then refer them to an appropriate legal aid resource. I just want to make a general comment. You know, as somebody who has been in labor and employment law for over 40 years, this issue of retaliation is a really big issue right now. The federal government, state government, everybody is being retaliated against. And there are a lot of venues. You can go to EEOC, you can go to the Division of Labor Standards Enforcement. Yes, there are various aspects of retaliation. Some are objective, some are very subjective. Very objective would be, someone makes a complaint and then there's an adverse employment action within a reasonable causal period of time, such as, a suspension or a dismissal or assignment to less work, or they don't get to work overtime anymore. And then there's real subtle innuendos that are very difficult to determine. And those are someone who is accused of something that may not have been true, maybe decides he doesn't like to talk to that worker anymore. Or maybe he doesn't include them in their little discussions that he has with other workers. And is that retaliation? We don't know. And then there's another level that I think we're dealing with here now, especially because of the influx of indigenous workers from southern Mexico who come to this country under difficult circumstances. They don't know the laws. And they're in an environment with foremen that are of a different ethnic origin that treat them differently in their home country. And everything they do is suspect. And everything they're concerned about, should I speak up or not? I mean, they're very concerned subjectively about everything. Everything is retaliation because of their circumstances that they're in. And that's another level that we have to deal with all the time. So I just wanted you to think about those subtleties from the perspective of the employer when you're requiring them to submit to this process as a requirement with this no retaliation agreement, because it's a very complex area of the law.
Again, I guess I just had a couple of questions. When you guys were talking about putting the agreement together, is it going to be called a good faith agreement now or a no retaliation agreement? Because that was going to be...
We've punted that one to the next meeting.
Okay, because either way, it needs to be the same, I guess, in both of them. And is it something that's going to be signed by both the employee and the employer, or was it just something that was signed by the employer, I guess? And so that's something you're still going to work on, to decide that next thing. Okay. And then the other question I guess I had was, it says here that the staff should offer to accompany the employer to make the initial contact if you're going to, if it's a criminal matter that's going to be referred. What exactly, I guess I wasn't sure exactly what that means. Does that mean that, depending on how many people you have in this office, do they set up an appointment at a separate time? Do they immediately go with them if it's something, really criminal? I wasn't sure how that was going to work or what that meant. So.
Hi, Arsenio Lopez with the Mr. Canadian Community Organizing Project. I'm the Executive Director. I don't know if it's a general comment or it's a question, but I'm curious to know how this program would help in those cases that once a worker report a case in their areas of work, how are we going to make sure that the changes, if there's going to be any change, will occur across the sector? Meaning, if a worker say that there are being boxes being missing from the total count for the end of the day, and it's being repeating happening. It's a continuous problem, and it's already for a week, 2 weeks, and then the worker decided to report it through the program. And if the conclusion of the result is being discovered that yes, definitely it's a case, the worker's being probably lost, I don't know, 10, 20 boxes. How this program will also make sure that other workers are not in the same situation, and what the steps or what will be the protocol that those type of investigation will occur. Because I think it's for everyone's interest, for the employer's perspective, for the employees, to solve any of those problems and make a change if that is the case. Because I see this program as an opportunity to make either employers or company culture change or systematic change in the industry, so we can send a better message to the employees for this sector, and to make sure that the sector is improving in the ways of welcoming workers, and that they feel that they can report those, and once they report those kind of violations, that there will be systematic change, not only one-on-one or individual change.
To that point, I was going to say the same thing, that I think that there should be a 10th point in the guidelines, something to the effect of assess for systemic occurrence, something like that. That just came up right now. Assess for systemic occurrence. So, we've talked about there being bad actors, right? That the barrel is full of great apples, but there's that bad apple. Well, if through this program that emerges because over a year you end up having 5 legitimate cases, whatever number, multiple legitimate cases from the same bad actor, then clearly to simply just wait for the 6th one and the 7th one and the 8th one to come in, you might be solving those individual ones, but there's indication that it's more than just an individual matter, but there is a systemic, possibly, situation. And if we can identify those bad actors that are, putting that black eye on the industry, then that is one of the goals, I would say, spoken or unspoken, of this program. So something addressing systemic impact. The other is, I think, related to number 7, assist with agreed upon resolution option. If the resolution option is, I do want to work through a state or federal agency, then it absolutely needs to include something more than, okay, here's the number for that agency, here's their address, here's their online address, go for it. Let me know when you have a claim number. It has to be more than that, and that relates to program goal, bullet point number 5, I believe, 4, 5. The goal is to provide unique services and leverage existing resources. So the unique service is this dialogue process. Let's avoid the lawyers. Let's avoid the bureaucratic process that takes forever and may go nowhere. That's the unique process, service. That's amazing. But the other is leverage existing resources. I think there were 2 main points from last year's summer seminar held by Supervisor Bennett and Zaragoza, where we had a dozen state and federal agency representatives. The 2 takeaways, I think, were, 1, that retaliation was an issue, which is why it needs to be addressed explicitly through this program. But the other was, every agency up there, when asked, where are they located, with the exception of ALRB, they're all outside of Ventura County. And in the case of the DLSC, you have to go in person, or in another case, you have to print out an online form. That is just not accessible. So that's the leverage existing resources in terms of facilitating getting through the state and federal bureaucracy and bringing that assistance home. Thank you.
Buenas tardes,
Good evening.
mi nombre es Jorge Tolerano,
My name is Jorge Toledano.
vengo representando al proyecto Mixteco Indígena,
I'm representing
proyecto Mixteco Indígena.
el proyecto Mixteco Indígena.
¿Cómo este programa va a asegurar que las compañías cumplan
How
con
is
las
this
leyes
program going to make sure that the companies comply with the laws,
que están violando las leyes o que
that are not complying with them, or there's violations about that,
reciban una multa
and make sure they receive a fine
para que
or a
tomen en serio
penalty,
este programa?
so they take this program seriously.
Hay muchas violaciones de leyes,
They're violating a lot of laws,
pero las
they're not
compañías no
complying
reciben
with them,
ni una sanción,
but the companies are not receiving any fines
por
or
eso estamos
penalties
pidiendo,
for it,
siguen y siguen violando las leyes.
so they continue doing it over and over again.
Un ejemplo,
An example,
cuando avisamos a Calosha,
when we told Kalosha,
cuando hay como baños sucios, Carlos, cuando hay baños sucios,
or when the bathrooms are dirty,
a Calosha avisa a la compañía
Kalosha tells the company,
cuando va a inspeccionar.
when they go inspect them,
¿Qué hacen las compañías? ¿Qué
what do
hacen?
the companies do?
Limpian, hacen todo bien.
They
cuando
clean,
llegan
they
a
do
la
everything
inspección,
right when they're there for the
haga
inspection.
de cuenta que no está violando la ley. Haga de cuenta que no hay nada, no hay violación a la ley.
Oh, and so they make it seem like they never did anything wrong.
Porque Calosha avisa a las compañías para...
Because
cuando
Kalusha
llegan a la
lets the
inspección.
company knows when they're going to go inspect.
Se supone que tiene que llegar a inspeccionar.
And they're
para
supposed to
ver las
show
compañías.
up without any previous notice.
Por eso quiero que preguntar el programa cómo va a ser
That's why I want to ask the program,
para que
how are
las
you going to make
compañías que
sure
no violan las leyes
that the companies that are not complying with the law
reciban una sanción
receive a penalty or a fine,
para que tomen en serio este programa.
so they can take this program seriously?
Gracias.
Thank you. My name is Alfonso Aguilar, and I'm representing Proyecto Mixteco. Sometimes the company or the employer abuse the workers because they don't know their rights. Some because they speak Mixteco and they don't speak Spanish very well. I would like to know how this program is going to make sure that employers do not take actions against the workers when they bring up an issue at work that's happening at work. My recommendation would be that employers sign an agreement where they won't take any action against the workers and decide to fix this problem through this program or any other way. Thank you, and God bless you.
Yes. Okay. Any other public comments? All right. We can move in. We've got 15 minutes, but maybe we can kind of quickly address some of those.
Buenas tardes,
Good evening.
mi nombre es José Luis Pérez,
My name is José Luis Pérez.
soy director de Líderes Campesinas.
I'm here for Líderes Campesinas.
Mi pregunta es,
My question is,
la doctora pregunta de qué horas iban a tener abiertas las oficinas para...
last meeting I asked you what the schedule would be for the offices.
Y otra pregunta para ellos,
And another question I have for you, I forgot.
estoy chiviado que no cuando la noche.
While you're thinking that, I think we said 11 to 7, right?
¿En cuántos días le ponen? Porque yo apenas miré ayer de esto, si no puedo poner más tiempo atrás.
Can you have the agenda ready like a couple of days before the meeting at least, because he didn't find out about it until yesterday. That's all, thank you.
Any other public comments?
Just a quick response that we did post the agenda and set up the notifications on Friday in Spanish and English. Yesterday, the materials were made available, but that also included just the translation, receiving the materials from the subcommittee.
And then to answer the other question, what we have here, and we'll get to this, I think probably at the next meeting, is we have hours of operation Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., and 2 Saturdays per month, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. But we'll talk about that hopefully at the next meeting.
My name is Santiago Rivera.
Quiero saber cómo pueden van a trabajar este programa con las cajas.
I want to know how this program is going to work with the boxes, and they pick up the boxes.
Quiero saber cómo va a trabajar este programa con tocante a las cajas cuando uno se queja.
I want to know how you're going to address the problem when you complain about the boxes
No nos creen.
or the pickers. They don't believe us.
Y quiero saber si yo me quejo,
And I want to know if I do complain,
me pagan a mí nomás. O sea, nomás acepto a mi caja nomás. O sea, como si yo me quejo, me pagan a mí nomás, no a mis compañeros.
if I complain, they only pay me, not my co-workers.
Me dicen, no digas nada a tus compañeros.
And they tell me, don't say anything to your co-workers.
Cuando nos quejamos, agarran nuestros nombres en la lista,
When we complain, they get our names on the list,
se acaba el trabajo y ya no nos dan trabajo.
and they don't give us more work.
Quiero saber cómo va a trabajar este programa tocante a eso.
I want to know how this program is going to help with that.
Es todo, gracias.
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments?
Just a clarification about he was saying about when he reported like some boxes is missing. So basically, they just deal with his case and they decided to pay back the person and say, okay, we're gonna pay you. There's missing the boxes, but don't share the information to anyone else. He also mentioned about hours missing and his time cards. And when that happens, he complains. They usually take their names on that list. I just want to clarify that.
Thank you. And thank you for the great trilingual interpretation here that we've got going. This is impressive and, shows, I think, the challenges that we've got in our community and the people stepping up to overcome those challenges. So, thank you. All right. Any other comments? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Well, just until the next meeting. Okay.
Good evening, and I pick lemons, and we have the same problem. We have problem with the beans, so I would like to know that too. Thank you.
All right. Should we get to some of these comments in the 10 minutes we have left?
Lucas, I'd like to make a general comment, and I hope I can express this eloquently or at least clearly. And this is something I'm hearing from a lot of people who have gotten up and generously shared their thoughts with us. It also may be something that within the committee we're not entirely in agreement about. I don't know. What my understanding of what we are trying to do is not about advocating on behalf of a worker who brings a complaint, but helping to support and empower that worker in reaching a solution himself or herself with the employer. our staff person is not going to be investigating every claim to see if it's righteous or not and making a decision about whether it is a valid claim that he should fight for. This is different. There are many groups who are already doing that. This is, in my mind, a program that is extremely respectful of both employees and employers. And the staff person's role is to facilitate better communication between the two parties and help come up with solutions. It's actually a mediation job. That's what a mediator does. But not to pronounce who is right and who is wrong and pursue a predetermined solution. So it's not advocacy. It's a different creature, and it's new, and it's different, and difficult to understand, but it can be very powerful, and that is the direction I think we're trying to go in.
So as we talk about the specifics of these resolution process guidelines, it may be more fitting to list this consultation step that I suggested. Now that I read through this, it may be more fitting for the beginning step in that process. I'm not sure. I need to go back and look at it again, but the consultation is what's going to happen regardless when somebody walks in, and it needs to happen. Question becomes, where's that best fitted into this document?
So 3 and 4 seem a little bit like that consultation to me, right? But maybe we need to add a word in consultation or flesh out.
Right, or it needs to be at the beginning.
Well, isn't number 1? That's gathering in the intake
The only thing that
process.
could be different in number 1 is, let's say that one of the staff members is out doing some of the other things that we've listed here, and a farm worker comes in, or let's say they're busy with somebody in the office, a farm worker comes in. The idea is that the receptionist or whoever's at the front desk is able to take the initial information so that we don't turn anybody away, that at least we gather that initial information, and then one of the 2 staff people can then meet with them. So it could be the same, but it could also be different depending on who is greeting or taking that phone call.
Oh,
That's great.
Actually, I didn't know that's what we intended in that first one. I thought that was the staff person.
It could be, but if that staff person is busy, then I think we need to make sure that somebody's able to take the initial information.
To actually request if maybe we might be able to hold this thought and just try to, with 5 minutes, kind of address the comments that public comment has raised, and then we can kind of add in our own changes and things during the next session. Just I want to make sure we get them while people are in the room and feel like they get there.
The other item that I think Maricela brought up is an issue on the agency to not simply, I think it was more on the previous section,
The
but
assist with
not to,
agreed upon resolution option.
yeah, not to simply have a case number. What that might look like is something that helps someone gain some awareness on how to navigate. I mean, that person the program officer is not going to be able to do all of the work that will be required to see something through. That's not realistic. I mean, I'd love to have that option dealing with my insurance company right now, but you do learn, and you can be coached on how to handle that appropriately, which is to say, I'm going to get a case number, I want a name of who I can talk to, and when the expected follow-up date and time is going to be, and hold people accountable to provide that to you. Right? That's how you advocate for yourself. As we know, that's the piece that's more important, right? To know how to deal with these agencies, and so there may be a coaching function involved in that as well.
And I think even basic things like helping someone fill out a form, right? Particularly
Make the
with
phone
we have
call.
limited literacy sometimes, right? And like those kinds of things. Yeah, sitting with them as they make the phone call and like, oh, okay, all right, here's press this for whatever, right? That kind of really basic navigation might be good.
I want to make a comment, Lucas.
Yeah.
There was a question as to what we meant by the staff accompanying the worker to the DA's office or the police department. That came out of the most recent subcommittee meeting, and so it was, the inclusion of what to do with the criminal matter came with the suggestion of Mr. Roy regarding the fact that the staff person or persons, are not going to most likely be competent to navigate and deal with a criminal matter, and so they should be referred to the appropriate agency. And if we're talking about something which is very often brought to our attention, like rape, then most definitely offering the victim the option to have somebody go with them is really, really important. And we wanted to make sure that we're being fully competent and mindful of where that person is when they're coming to seek our assistance, and make that as an offer that they would make that connection with the DA's office or the victim services or the police department and offer to go at that person's level of comfort to be there with them. I think the office, what time the office should be open, somebody asked about that, and I think it's been suggested from 11 to 7. Is that what you said, Lucas? We haven't decided on that, but that's what the recommendation is, as it sits in the proposal. And I really like the conversation around advocacy and empowerment. I don't think one is mutually exclusive of the other. But I do want to say, and we've heard it from the comments here today, is that this is not to say that the person who comes to the door or the speakers who have spoken have not already tried on their own to be their own advocates. And so let's be mindful that they're coming because they're not getting anywhere for whatever reason. The door is being shut on them, and they want to continue to be their advocates, but for a lot of reasons they need somebody else. And so I do see that this staff person or persons may have an advocacy role. I don't right now feel comfortable believing or thinking that there's not going to be some type of an advocacy role. But I don't think that if you're an advocate, it means that you're not contributing to somebody's empowerment, or that they're not already empowered to have advocate for themselves. And the reality is that sometimes when other people speak with them, the concern is heard in a different way.
I want to address something that I heard raised from a couple people, both staff from Cause of My Cup as well as some of the workers, around the kind of systemic issue, right? Is it, if you deal with an individual worker's issue, how are you getting at if that say wage theft might be occurring throughout that work site, or that might be a kind of problem actor that has repeat occurrences. And I know we don't necessarily maybe have time to solve this, but one thought is there's kind of the analysis of trends that was kind of brought up. But maybe something that could be done is also, if say wage theft happens to one worker on a farm, the resource program could come and do a presentation to just all the workers about, hey, here's this farm worker resource program. This is what it is if you ever need it for any reason. Not necessarily like this guy here had a problem and it got resolved, right? But just hey, we're just here to present to you information about this program. And then that way, if there are other workers on on that field that experience the same thing, they'll come to that program, and if not, then they might not, right? But it's a way to both increase awareness of the program and and kind of advance that goal without a kind of the one thing kind of turns into a class action kind of thing or something like that, right? Just want to throw that suggestion out there.
I think a lot of what we're running into is defining terms, and now now we're talking about what advocacy means. And I don't think we're actually disagreeing, Jessica. I think when I'm talking about advocacy, I'm thinking it's based on our staff person drawing a conclusion about who's right and who's wrong, and then advocating accordingly. And I don't believe that's what we're thinking of.
Just to make a point about the systemic resolution to systemic problems throughout the area, if through this database we identify, or this program identifies, systemic problems with one employer on one issue or one employer in general, the whole idea of the reason why we're here is to try to guard against that sort of behavior. So I'm 100% for figuring out a system that resolves that quickly, so that sort of thing doesn't continue to be an issue, because it hurts all of us. That's what we're here to guard against.
Well, any other, we're a little over our time. Any other comments from the group here? All right. Well, I guess we'll take this up at the next meeting. I saw Rosa sent out a doodle. Everyone please fill that out. I haven't yet. All right. Motion to adjourn? Nope.
Just before you do, can you please make sure that you public comment for items that are not
Oh.
on the agenda?
Any public comment for items not on the agenda?
I move to adjourn. Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Good job.